Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC has officially come out, and man, this is quite the adventure. With an enormous open world map, many new and challenging bosses, and incredible special weapons containing powerful ashes of war. Now, I figured the best way to review this content was just to show you my journey through the game while talking about the various things I liked and disliked. So, I guess the ultimate question is, can I beat Elden Ring's DLC for the first time? Let's find out. In order to first start the DLC, you'll need to have defeated Mohg the Lord of Blood, and I believe Radahn as well. Then you can head to Mohg's boss arena and talk to an NPC there. She briefly explains that you and many others were guided here to the realm of shadow where Miquella dwells. And so we touch the arm and teleport to a new land. The first thing you'll notice is how beautiful this world actually looks, and clearly the majority of the development went towards designing a very artistic world. The place always makes you want to see more, with enormous mountains or dark castles looming in the distance. Now, the first thing I did was grab the map, of course, so I know where the heck I'm going. And as I did this, an odd creature attacked me that just looms up on a building here and wait for prey. Obviously, I died, since From Software's DLCs always have incredibly difficult elite enemies to deal with. Near the left side of this cliff is a sort of burial site. These contain what is essentially a PvP boss fight. You head in and 1v1 a humanoid with special weapons and armor. This one contained a knight with one large sword and a crossbow. What was immediately apparent to me was I was not supposed to be here. Now, I knew beforehand that there are special items to increase your power within this DLC, a way to progress through this separate world without just over-leveling in the main game. As I didn't have any right now, this bro took me out quick. I headed back for a rematch and definitely think these are a highlight of the DLC. I personally really hate PvP and Souls games with a passion, like despise them and refuse to play unless I'm offline. But in these specific cases where it's an AI and a PvP sort of matchup, it's really fun. You could just test out weapons and mess around with all kinds of mechanics, stun them with jumping attacks, use everything in the game to great effect. For the DLC, I'd planned to use this gargoyle sword that deaths an overtime wave ability. However, for backup, I of course have the blasphemous blade everyone uses on faith builds. I mean, it's probably the best weapon in the game, granting massive range damage and healing on attacks. So with that in hand, I cut him down and received his armor and weapon. Continuing on, I reached a golden cross where two NPCs meet me. Fragments can be found at these crosses and a few other places as well. These are the items you consume in a grave site to boost your attack and defense in this DLC. And I know From Software questlines are almost always extremely depressing, as most end with the people dying or you taking them out personally. But I don't know, I was kind of excited for these ones, as it seemed like we were all having the same sort of goal, reaching Miquella. In the lower section of this first region, I took on a single golden knight. These end up being more standard enemies here soon, but this one stands as a more major encounter. He's tough with some ridiculously delayed attacks, but with a lot of backing up, I got the black steel great hammer. In the middle section, however, I found a small building containing the backhand blade. This item is two backhanded curved swords with a very interesting movement. The Ash of War is a very quick rush forward followed by a stab. Seemed to be more for PvP, like honestly a lot of stuff in this DLC, and the actual attacks were more sluggish than I expected for a dual weapon, but cool nonetheless. I decided to head onto the bridge and make my way towards a castle here. In the camp, I fought my way through to the Fire Spark perfume bottle. These might be one of the coolest weapons added, as it's just two bottles that throw out sparks. They deal pure elemental damage, these ones right here being fire, and are quite close range. I actually have said before it'd be cool to have perfumer enemies' weapons, which made this item a lot of fun to find. On my way up the castle, I find another fragment near a letter left by the main NPC. Basically, it says we need to burn the black tree guarding our way to Miquella. This area was a ton of fun, as castles are very well done in these games, being dense and full of stuff to do. While here, I found the Milady in a tower chest, a light greatsword having a more dance-like moveset. This one seems like it could be very useful, as the attacks are decently fast, and the Ash of War is pretty impactful as well. At the top, fighting my way through more sorcerer enemies, I meet a Carrion Knight with one massive magic sword, and he beat me into the ground immediately. This was not the first warning that I'm not leveled up enough to be here, but I of course paid no heed to that nonsense. I did manage to barely defeat him, dropping a sword identical to one you get in Ronnie's castle, I believe. And time for the moment we've all been waiting for, the first major boss fight, R'hllana the Twin Moon Knight. Now, I wanted to use the Black Flame Monk Spirit Ashes for this playthrough, so both me and him could stack overtime damage on everything. A cool idea, but dude, it didn't work at all. I tried the Dung Eater as well, and both just do not have enough health to last long at all. Eventually, I swapped to the Mimic tier as he could use my sword to heal himself, which is just what I needed for him to stay alive. With more deaths, I then found an NPC summon sign for the first Night Lady who could join me, now taking on the boss with a 3v1, and still nothing. I actually think this was the one boss I truly struggled with that I could have probably done solo. Her attacks actually make sense, I was just here way too early without more fragment upgrades. Regardless, where there's a will, there is a way. After finally learning how to dodge the gigantic magic AoEs in her second phase, I forced the boss onto the other two and spammed ranged waves of fire for the win. This does not bode well at all for the rest of the run, but I do think leaving and coming back would have made me really enjoy this fight a lot more. At the next gray site, I meet the NPCs once again and find a note that says someone is challenging me. I believe it's the monk, however when I found him, he didn't do anything, so I don't know what this is about. There just so happens to be a castle in the first area I neglected to explore. Heading back, I met a random old man who's never seen again and a really fun turtle armor guy. And up in this castle, we find spider scorpions. Yeah, this is a surprise to be sure, and I have to say the most interesting encounter in the entire DLC. I was genuinely terrified for a good few seconds as this thing falls out of the sky on top of you. Reminds me of Bloodborne in the short section where these huge black spiders hang on webs. Then in the next room, there's a ton of tiny Scorpo spiders I quickly burned away. This happens to be where I found my first revered spirit ashes. They are often on these statues here, and while the fragments buff me up for the DLC, these buff the spirit ashes, so they too could actually stay alive longer and help you out in boss fights. Nothing special here as we journey through more ruins, unlocking shortcuts, and doing standard Soulsy stuff. I did find a room with an even larger Scorpo spider, which I of course cheesed with no shame whatsoever. Another one of those freaking annoying disc enemies caught me off guard. They are very rare, but scattered around the more important areas of the DLC, and they really suck. Seemingly endless combos of attacks that give you very little time to retaliate. Jumping attacks do seem like the only thing that stopped their aggression for a second, which is common for quite a few elites actually. And dun dun dun, we run into another major boss. This one is a large dancing lion. Now my rule for this entire first run was that anytime I met a boss that didn't really feel that bad and I genuinely enjoyed the moveset, I would fight solo. No spirits and no summons. Now I'm not one of these guys that's like you can't use spirits and if you do you're a loser. But I do think that when I can, I like to learn the movesets just for some more fun. However, we haven't really reached one of those bosses yet. I had the beefy NPC lady from earlier and my mimic helping me against this guy as his attacks are crazy. Lightning and wind are thrown around as he pounces on your head. Thankfully, the gargoyle blade has a very low FP cost and hits from a good solid range. I use this to avoid getting close as he switched to ice now. The moveset here isn't actually that bad, all things considered, although I will say how annoying it is to get knocked off your feet every single time you take damage. Seems unnecessary, but with ranged attacks like this, he goes down in one try. Although I will admit, this was a complete mess the entire time and I used all my heals. I collected another spirit ash here and found the black tree we were informed of earlier. No entry until we burn it, of course, so I gotta leave for now. Down in a more main part of the city I passed by earlier, I have a short duel with a Fire Knight NPC. Again, these are all fun. You get a very fair fight with clear attacks and openings. His moves were actually pretty crazy with fire exploding everywhere, but most humanoids get trashed if you can attack enough times in a row. Also, I have zero shame spamming my Ashes of War through this entire DLC, dude. These enemies are insane and I'm not pulling any punches if I don't have to. He drops a new talisman that increases attack after defeating an enemy. I've always found these buffs to be completely worthless, as in Souls and Souls-like games, they never do anything in boss fights. Down in a swampy area here, I meet a ghost flame dragon. Of course, we're all familiar with the mini dragons in the base game, but an undead one, that's a cool idea. The gargoyle blade here deals a wave attack that applies a small death damage over time, like I mentioned earlier. Well, it just so happens that death is holy damage. And guess what an undead dragon is weak to? On top of that, the wave travels through the air, unlike the blasphemous blade, which only moves in a line along the ground. I was able to pinpoint the dragon's head with his weakness, dealing massive poison damage in general. Turns out I didn't even need the mimic here, as I perfectly countered this monstrosity. Really exciting encounter, as for those who don't know, holy damage kinda sucks really bad for most of Elden Ring's main game. The big guy goes down no problem, and I don't even see his attacks hardly at all yet. Behind the dragon is a cave or jail. There are a few of these and they stand as longer dungeons. Jumping down some pots, taking out these bloody pustule creatures who deal crazy damage of course, and completing a few minor puzzles to collect loot. At the end, we meet the demi-human swordmaster who kills me 2 seconds after entering the fight. Sadly, this is one major downside of this DLC I think really hurts its quality. There are a lot of bosses this go around who instantly attack you upon entering the arena. That's a major problem as you don't get to summon your spirit or even lock on before dying instantly. I don't at all enjoy dying in 2 seconds for each attempt. Thankfully, all these longer dungeons have Stakes America near the end, so you just spawn at the boss fight instead of redoing the entire dungeon. That is an incredible way to improve the gameplay, I have to admit. After dodging first and then summoning the Mimic Tier, we beat this guy down with no remorse, dropping the demi-human Spirit Ash. Sadly, none of the Spirit Ashes last as long as the Mimic Tier, so I just stick with that one most of the time. One annoying thing that I will mention about this dungeon is that there's a spot where you have to jump on these pots and you can miss it your first time around. Of course, the jumping is a pain, as always in Souls games, but the reward for the secret chest that you get is a hefty cracked pot. The DLC has a lot of stuff like this where it's really pointless loot. Most players, I'm talking 80 to 90%, will never actually use. It's just a waste of time collecting this stuff. Like a bunch more cookbooks, which, I don't know, crafting's not something I want to do in my Souls game. The problem with crafting and actually using consumables for boss fights is they only last until you die. Usually, it takes like 20 plus tries at least to beat a boss. So you just waste all this time crafting a bunch of stuff that goes to nothing. Anyway, I fought my way up to the Fog Rift Catacombs. Catacombs are all over the base game as a way to give you upgrades to Spirit Ashes and just more of them in general. They're often very puzzly and stand as perfect underground dungeons. As far as I could tell, the DLC Catacombs are all much longer and harder to traverse, which I initially hated, but grew to enjoy as I slowly found the next path towards the boss. This one has nothing crazy, just a new golem type and sorcerers that bounce magic off walls. Near the end, we meet a Death Knight for a boss. I didn't really want to lose after the long journey down here, and even though there's a Stake America here, I just summoned the Mimic and went to work. And he felt a lot like a Crucible Knight battle, where the Death Knight has a very few set of attacks that you could stun them out of or easily dodge the Q. The lightning attacks here are awesome to dodge, and this poor guy just got unlucky that I figured he would be way harder than he was. His axes dropped, being one weapon that turned into 2 dual-wielding axes. The Ash of War is this really cool lightning shift movement, which again feels very oriented towards PvP only. I don't see how this is going to benefit you in an actual boss fight unless it has iframes. What I will say is the axes are very fast and hit hard compared to the dual swords I found earlier. Also, lightning teleport gets cool points, we have to give it that. I found another fragment with a new NPC, however this guy was never seen again, so no clue what his deal is. And so I headed to the west in search of more stuff and stumbled upon this old guy dying on the road. He yelled about some guy named Bale and then just kinda sat there. Moving forward, I encountered the ancient Dragon Man, which cracked me up honestly. For some reason, Dragon Man sounds like a super quirky superhero name to me. The guy sports some sick armor and a new weapon type, the Great Katana. They're really long and hit hard, but his swings are absurdly slow, giving me time to dodge his dragon bite and wave him to death. Of course, behind him, he was guarding a cave called the Dragon's Pit. Inside is another magma worm you fight several times in the main game, and I simply cheesed him from the hallway so I wouldn't need to redo the dungeon. He's actually an optional boss, granting a dragon heart and an ancient dragon smithing stone, which is another feature of this DLC. Smithing stones are everywhere, seemingly random 1s, 4s, 8s, all of them scattered around. The max ones, which are very rare in the base game, are actually dropped from several different things, mainly dragons, but there's a bunch of them to collect in the area coming up. For now, we face this cave's boss, the Ancient Dragon Man, the guy from earlier, I guess, who once again kills me 2 seconds after the fight starts. I died a few times here trying to use different incantations for some fun. Unfortunately, incantations seem mostly useless through all these bosses as they just attack too fast to get them off easily. It's definitely possible, like anything, but hitting with a big sword is far easier, or just using the Ash of War 2, which is absurdly fast. I decided for my final try to not use the Mimic Tier at all. For some reason against humanoids, it could often be easier without a spirit, as the switching aggro at the last second really messes with you. Again, I loved this fight. Thought it was a fun encounter where I wasn't constantly on the defensive. Double big sword at the last second for an extra pizzazz, and the Dragon Man is no more. He just so happens to drop the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, one of the coolest new weapons. I actually hate the moveset of all the Great Katanas, it feels extremely sluggish, but check out the Ash of War. Jump up and slash a death slice through the air. Has more range than you might expect and looks awesome. Also blood loss on this one, but I mean it's super slow, so not really the optimal choice for that type of build. And now we've officially reached Dragon Mountain, a massive stretch of jagged peaks with dead dragons and live ones scattered everywhere. There's one here in this valley that I attacked immediately, and again, the power of my sword really shows. Hitting the dragon's head this easily knocks them fast and deals very optimal damage. Also, dragons really aren't that hard at this point, as most of them have a very similar moveset to the ones we've been fighting in the base game. So after practice against 20 plus dragon fights in the base game, the dragon goes down without too much hassle, and no spirit ashes again, which is fun. And yeah, this Dragon Mountain area is one of the coolest things FromSoft has ever designed. It's just a dangerous area filled with dragons. On up the path, we actually see a dragon fighting with another dragon. This is what really makes an open world interesting. Enemies interacting with the world around them. To see two dragons battling it out for territory makes for excellent world building and an experience in general. I jumped in to help the weaker one out against the boss dragon, and yeah, just an awesome experience. Dragons are of course kinda janky still, with them flying up on mountains randomly or hitting you because the camera should clearly be zoomed out for monster fights, and still isn't. But I mean, come on, this is two dragons fighting with you in the middle. I thoroughly enjoyed this. We once again meet the crazy old man who tells me to scale the mountain and summon him to take down that Bale guy he was yelling about earlier. We continue up to take down an elite dragon. These ones I don't enjoy, as their attacks are all AoEs you can't see due to camera issues. I mean, all the base game ones suck, and this guy has similar attacks. But with some mimic abuse, he drops the two best smithing stone types. And so they begin building the tension with what is obviously a major battle, jumping up peak after peak, running through lightning strikes and countless dead dragons, reaching what we can obviously see is a massive arena. And in flies Bale the Dread, who is no man at all. Instead, he's a massive and terrifying dragon with ripped wings and a cut off leg, who then kills me 2 seconds after the fight starts again, dude. How many times is this gonna happen? Now, I was here for a good hour and a half. One thing to note is that this is clearly an optional boss in general, having nothing to do with the DLC story, if you can even call it a story. And I'm clearly underpowered, lacking those more fragments. I literally deal no damage at all. And I was not about to do this solo, as dragon fights in general are a nightmare. Eventually, I found the NPC summon sign for that old guy who will help you out. I wanted him to help for the story, but only found it after dying like 30 times. This boss fight is insanely cool. Looks awesome, has crazy spectacle, and is built up very well. But, and that's a pretty big but, I don't think this is a well-designed fight for several reasons. One major theme of this DLC is every boss has a grab attack. I mean, seriously, every single major boss has a grab where you're unable to control your character, and then you take 4 or 5 hits in a row, often leading to instant death. One-hit kills in general I think are terrible mechanically for the player, and any time control is taken out of the player's hands, that's bad gameplay. Yes, it means you must learn the fight well, but it makes for a lot of 3-second fights because you thought it was a different attack and you didn't press dodge roll yet. This is all over the place in this DLC, and Bale has it bad. Not to mention, he's another boss who attacks you instantly, so getting your spirit out is really tough. In fact, my damage was so bad I eventually switched to doing double size to try and force bleed to give me the win. The painful thing here is you need to be in close to attack him, but when you do, he breathes fire under himself, so you need to run away. Then run back in, then run away, then run back in. It's kinda lame. Also, again, why no zoomed out camera? Anybody remember Midir in Dark Souls 3? The most crazed dragon fight at the time, where the camera was never an issue. Now in Elden Ring, when fighting dragons, you literally can't see what's happening. I don't want to stare at the dragon's tail for fire to all of a sudden hit me out of nowhere. Just zoom the camera out, like way out. It's really not that hard. Of course, like I said, I was definitely underleveled here, so it could have been way easier for sure. And regardless of the flaws here, I do think the fight was a cool experience. Eventually, after abusing jump attacks and bleed, I finally got this big boy put to rest, which felt very rewarding. I then received his heart as a reward and let out a sigh of relief. That was a nightmare with over 60 plus tries. Whatever's after this could not possibly be easy, that's for sure. I went back to this large tower here and rode the elevator up to get a dragon smithing stone. Kind of odd for this location, but definitely useful. Then I rode on up to a church in this second plateau region to find another fire knight. This one sports a large rapier instead of a spear, and well, let's just say my stamina's been upgraded for quite a bit. So much that I could stun lock NPCs with relative ease. He drops a prayer room key, which again, I don't know what this goes to. I just grabbed stuff and moved on. It's hard to tell without just reading the wiki. Now, another really cool actual enemy you see in these lands are massive giants of fire. They're enormous, and you can see them throughout pretty much the entire area. There's one in each section of the DLC. I of course skipped the first one since he was just too tanky at the time. The cool part is you're fighting a giant fiery beast with red exploding everywhere. The bad part is everything about these guys makes for terrible gameplay. So most giant enemies have a mechanic where you're supposed to poise break them and then they take damage once you get the crit on them. This makes them lose over half health in a single crit hit. The fire baskets here work the same way. You beat on their feet for 2 minutes straight, eventually get the poise break, and then they lose over half health. You're going to need to poise break them twice for the win, and this leads to you jumping and hitting in one location for 5 minutes straight. You can of course get one hit by yet another completely unfair grab attack, and even when you get the poise break, the giants might fall on a hill where you can't actually get the crit off. It's again a really cool idea and makes for cool world building, but the gameplay itself is awful and feels like way more work than it should. Then when you finally take them down, you get new tiers for your physic and a crafting material, which again, I don't use those. As far as I could tell, the new rewards from these guys are mostly terrible. Some are OP, but ones like this is just going to restore HP to allies. I mean, a cool idea to keep summons alive, but another one placed oil on enemies. It's a great enemy for having a threat looming over you all the time, but they're pretty lame to actually fight. Now I encountered my first forge dungeon. These I won't explain much as they're very simple. More smithing stones everywhere, cool new golem enemies to fight, and it's all about solving one puzzle in the dungeon. Once it's solved, you reach a forge where you get a unique weapon. I loved this idea as From Software puzzles usually are right in front of your face, yet you don't see them for some time, which makes for a lot of oh duh moments that can be kind of funny. But also, they're completely pointless dungeons unless you want that specific forge weapon it drops, because it doesn't seem like any of them have bosses. I did them all because I wanted the experience, but with no boss, there's really no incentive to complete these. Albeit, some of the weapons are really cool, like this one, which is an ancient meteoric greatsword, by far the coolest one from these dungeons, so that's neat. Also, I was stuck on this extremely easy puzzle here for 40 minutes. Gosh, I am pretty dumb sometimes. Here we find my biggest complaint with this DLC overall, and something I actually think is a major problem. This side of Grace has a monk NPC we all saw in the trailers. Sadly, he never says anything, which I thought was pretty lame, but that's not the point. Behind him are these ruins that lock away 5 extremely important areas of the map, over half of this DLC. You need to scale down these buildings to enter a hole there, and then move on into where you can find a lot of fragments. Well, something is clearly very wrong with the drop down point here, where you just drop dead every single time you fall down, as the fall damage means it's too high. Much later on in my playthrough though, I randomly found a video showing that if you just jump across onto the wall and then fall down, you don't die. But clearly this is unintended, and I mean, I brute forced my way through harder content when I could have had way more upgrades because of this right here. It's very obvious you should be able to get down here, but I had to leave for now as I died 10 times trying to attempt the fall. You also get the Shattered Stone Talisman here, which raises power of kicking and stomping skills, which again feels very PvP related. Up the hill here, we find another Ghost Flame Dragon. This one is fighting against an army of knights, and again, having a cool interaction with the world makes these moments stand out, as I began by helping the knights, and then accidentally hit one, which made everything a lot harder. The dragon's still pretty easy since my sword is freaking awesome, and he dropped yet another heart and dragon smithing stone. The Fort of Reprimand lies atop this hill, and here we fight with these crazy omen killers from the base game. Everything in this very specific castle dropped blessed bone shards. Not sure why, as I never found a use for them, but they were all over. Near the end, we find another Black Knight. This twin blade wielding knight sporting Crucible Knight-like magic. I enjoyed this battle yet again, as facing off against a twin blade was definitely very different. You could sort of dodge into the swipes to easily avoid them, even though that seems kind of counterintuitive. He goes down dropping another neat looking Ash of War, this one being Wings of Gold. With a few more upgrade materials scattered around to find a cave where the Heal from Afar incantation is found. That sounds like a really fun idea actually. And on through is the area underneath the main castle I haven't been to yet. I find another furnace dungeon, this one rewarding the Golem Smith Spear Dash. That one sounds very useful as these guys are incredibly tanky. After finally finding the map, I scour this area underneath the green portion of your map for really anything. And here lies another really big issue with this DLC. There are massive stretches of land with absolutely nothing in them. The worst 2 sections of Elden Ring's base game are the lake you reach where Renala is and the mountaintop of the giants. Both areas are extremely large sections of land with only a handful of activities, and this DLC is basically both of those areas combined. All the activities here are pretty cool, but there's also a whole lot of exploring only to find you rode on your horse for 20 minutes with no major encounter or valuable loot. This didn't really ruin the fun I was having, but it's incredibly obvious that some areas were created only to look cool and create this kind of interesting world, rather than for content to participate in. Another neat idea they added in is these wind columns you use to warrant to jump up. You're unable to use the wind column until you find a separate pile of rocks and break them. Some were so well hidden I just couldn't do that part, but others like this one here are not that far away. Up this cliff, we fight against Red Bear, an NPC with bear gear and powers. From the very limited lore I've watched, I know bears and dragons are closely related in this game, so his bear roars are actually very similar to the dragon roar we already acquire in the main game. And Red Bear wasn't all that hard at all. I know everybody was really excited for the claw type weapons, but dude, they really suck. Extremely low damage with attacks that are way too easy to read. Also, with how spammy bosses get here, you want as much damage in 1 or 2 hits you could do versus a ton of small ones. So claws are not for me, although I believe some can deal crazy stance damage if you're into that. After the easiest boss yet, we receive Red Bear's claw and his armor. Actually, the armor set we just got is not what he was wearing. That's kinda odd. And after messing with the claws for a sec, I take it back. These are pretty fun. Wow, they're fast. Obviously, this guy was using them very wrong. I then found another fire basket giant and beat him down for 5 minutes to receive the deflecting hard tier. It enhances guard, which again, I don't know how you guard against 7 or 8 combos bosses do, but it's cool for build variety, I guess. In a more woodsy section back near the castle, I find a red bear. I assumed this was a boss correctly, as most bears aren't really red in the game. And I hate bears, as I think most people do. They have like the worst moves ever created and horrible camera issues. So I mimicked the heck out of him and spammed Blasphemous Blade, which she's obviously weak to. Fire versus furry bear, it makes sense, people. This dropped the Pelt of Ralva, which you might recognize from the thumbnail of this video. Actually, a really cool helm I throw on later. For now, we move on to the Shadow Keep Castle and face the hippo. Yeah, this boss is a giant hippo. I had a good laugh at that one. And we have more grab attack malarkey that I still have no clue how to dodge. It grabbed me all 9 times I fought a creature like this. Yes, there are more, and no matter what direction I dodged, it caught me every time. Then it's also a major janky camera battle, leading to me spamming ranged attacks. Now, the hippo actually dropped 2 fragments, which is awesome, and the Crucible aspect Thorns, which shoots out thorns like a porcupine, how the boss did. Most Crucible incantations don't appeal to me, but it looks interesting. Shadowkeep is an enormous part of this DLC. By that I mean 2 secret areas are locked underneath it. There's an entire underwater section we uncover later. You find a secret path leading to the woods. There's a top part of the castle, lots of platforming, red knights. It's pretty big, man. This is easily the best location in the DLC as well, because castles are where all the best content is, and trying to find your way through is a blast. Now, the Fire Knights, on the other hand, are a nightmare. They spam worse than those ugly Blade Dancer creatures, and you can't stop their attacks without a jump attack. At least I couldn't. They feel very FromSoft DLC-like, as beastly enemies who show no mercy. Kind of fun to fight once you get him down, I do admit that. And here atop this long castle section lies Mesmer the Impaler. Easily my least favorite boss fight from any game I've ever played, and an absolute nightmare. Now, I really came to love some of the bosses in this DLC. Actually, 3 of them I think are the best bosses in the entire game for me. This one here was not, however. I never even remotely figured out his moveset. As soon as you enter, he becomes a fireball and rushes you with an explosion. And then he just starts spinning, flailing, poking, jumping. It's way too much. And this is where the boss fights become more than just dodge at the right time. Now you need to dodge in the right direction at the right time. This guy just has way too many combos. He attacks like 6 times in a row. You hit once, and then he goes back to attack 6 more times. This was the point where I genuinely was not having any amount of fun. And okay, skill issue, gotta learn the moves, I get all that, but spending an hour to learn a boss's moves where I died 2 or 8 seconds into the fight was not fun. Not to mention, this boss also gets another grab attack that instantly kills you. Since I wasn't really getting many attacks off, I switched back to bleed and hoped that me and my summons combined bleed would take him down. Again, I wanted to not use spirit summons for at least some of the fights if I could pull them off. This was not one of these fights. Here you just have to know what's coming next, because fire's always in your field of vision, and his moves come out instantly. After somewhere around 40 attempts, I will say his moveset definitely can be learned for the first part. I started to see some of what was going on, but then second phase happens and this fight loses all sense of good design. Giant snakes thrash you as death liquid covers the entire screen. Call me bad at the game, that's totally fine, but I truly think this is the lowest form of boss design I've ever seen. Luckily, I finally got the Mimic tier to stay alive long enough to get multiple bleed procs, and the nightmare was over. Unfortunately, this boss alone makes me almost never want to play this DLC again, and he's required since he drops the flame to burn away the black tree protecting Miquella. So if you really hate spammy bosses, this is probably going to be a real low for you. Back in the Temple Town ruins, which is again under that green section of the map, I found the two-handed swords talisman, which boosts attack power for two-handed weapons. The first really strong talisman I found that I could definitely use for my build. Moving on, I find the Scorpion River Catacombs. Here we get to see a different mechanic that took me by surprise. There are these statues that have large black eyes. If you get in range of their sight, Death Blight begins to build up. Death Blight, of course, instantly kills your character upon fully proccing, so this is something to pay attention to. They seem unkillable, and there was a moving version as well. I defeated some knights down here, which, why are they in catacombs? That's kinda odd, but I got the Black Knight Captain Ashes, which I imagine are nowhere as good as the Mimic, but could be fun. The boss at the end is another Death Knight. This one sports one giant axe instead of two smaller ones. The last boss wasn't bad, so I went no summons, and it was again a really fun battle. Watch for him to cover a lot of ground in one go, and man, his cloak looks so cool. Of all enemies, one called a Death Knight seems appropriate for souls. For those who don't know, bell-bearing hunters are my favorite bosses in Elden Ring. Truly fun movesets to master if you stay in close and be aggressive with your dodges. Death Knights are up there now as well, since humanoids that actually act human and not like some anime baloney are peak gameplay for me. Of course, he drops his axe with a very similar Ash of War to the previous axes, and the Cerulean Amber Medallion 3. More mana, which is one I don't think anybody uses. In the top left corner of the map, we find another red bear, who upon defeat drops Roar of Regalia. The same roar the dragon does, which I'm pretty sure these just suck in PvE. I don't know, they always seem worthless to me and more PvP centered, but check out the animation. It looks really animalistic, because it's a bear, and bears are animals. Get it? Back up in the Shadowkeep Castle, I found a separate direction to head and begun my journey into the Green Plateau region. And here's where the quality of the open world falters hard once again. You fight many different enemies, but there's only a few smithing stones as rewards and tons of junk to fill this large section of land. Some highlights are Rain of Fire incantation from a fire mage, cool spell. Another fragment from a hippo boss, which is not a boss now, just an elite enemy, who again grabs me, of course. I told you, they get me every time. Killing a giant Scorpo spider to get the Spider Scorpion Ashes, which does sound really fun, and defeating a very troublesome Crucible Knight with his hammer and helmet. The hammer is awesome. I actually got a bit frustrated here, as I know for a fact there are a few extra things I couldn't do. There was just way too many directions and paths that lead off into odd directions. Honestly, a lot of this DLC map is very hard to read, as you can't really tell if something is on your level or completely cut off by a cliff. The area looks beautiful though, with a green and more Limgrave feel to it. How about a talisman that improves backsteps and makes you take more damage? I feel kind of misled by some of the YouTubers who got access to the DLC early. They were saying that there was a lot of OP talismans. Most are very situational or just not worth it at all. After getting grab attacked by a wicker basket, I came back to take him down for the Crimson Sapping Cracked tier that grants HP on attacks. Not a bad one actually, which is nice to see. Well, after a lot of exploring and dying, I made it up to the next major boss fight. This one, I summoned the Monk NPC for because finally we get to see what he can do. Spoiler, he absolutely sucks. This guy might be the worst NPC in the game. Actually funny, since I thought it'd be pretty cool. This is Romina, Saint of the Bud. Back to fighting Scarlet Rot, she's a lady with a scorpion body. And here we have the second best boss fight from the DLC. So much so that I decided no summons, I actually wanted to learn the attacks. And I was not disappointed. Still took me a while to get her down, but it was a good time even with the failed attempts. And here's why. All of her attacks are clearly telegraphed beforehand. She attacks a max of 3 times before you can get a hit in, and aside from one really odd hitbox with the centipede, her attacks feel very, very fair. I also think the color palette of this arena made it very easy to see what was happening at any given time. It's still frustrating that bosses try and attack almost every time you heal. I mean, to the point where you can say out loud, I'm gonna get hit, just as you press the flask, and boom, they attack you. Of all things, this reminds me of Notchka from Dark Souls 2, I think her name was. The biggest thing is, she has this attack where she swings the red melee and then follows it up. This one attack is like 80% of the fight. As soon as I got that down, things went so smoothly, because she really uses it a lot. For my winning fight, I did actually get grabbed by her, which has her inflict you with Scarlet Rot. Funny thing is, I'm a faith build with Cleanse Me on, so I could have fixed this. For some reason, this never occurred to me while in the midst of such concentration, and by the time I killed her, I had like no heals and was almost dead to rot. Punishing her needle stab downwards feels so good, and boom, you have one of the biggest DLC highlight moments for sure. This fight was exactly what I wanted from Elden Ring. Hiding behind this arena is the Sealing Tree, which we burn using the fire the burning boss dropped to us. This unlocks the entire castle area and automatically teleports us over there. And while it does take a while to get through, the castle section itself really isn't all that large. Exploring every nook and cranny is still a must, as we need fragments and upgrades for the Spirit Ashes. You never really know if an elite enemy is going to drop them, so being thorough is a must. There's definitely some really dreadful sections here filled with gotcha moments, like this lion humanoid I was forced to cheese from afar. The dude has a boss-like moveset and blocks the last spot leading to a gray site. He is brutal, and then after I managed to die to a disc enemy again with their extremely annoying moveset. I got the Gravebird helm, which maybe has to do with a secret, otherwise I'm not sure who would wear that. Kind of funny looking. Finally, nearing the end of the section is another elite lion man, but thankfully they let you summon spirits here. We bully him into submission and find none other than the NPC who helped us get here time and time again. Story-wise, it's explained here just a bit that we didn't really want to follow in Miquella's footsteps. Instead, the Erdtree led us here to become Lord overall. But the NPCs that have been helping you time and time again protect and follow Miquella, of course leading to you battling them. For some reason, the random Blood Invader guy that you fight twice in the main game is here to help you invade them. I'm sure he's explained lore-wise, but it made no sense to me at the time. First, we take on the crazed dual sword guy who quickly cuts us down in 2 seconds. Second try, I was more careful. Then the monk and golden knight lady begin to fight you as well. And then we see that the monk guy, again, absolutely sucks, bro. This guy was hyped to the moon in the trailer, and he's terrible. Does literally nothing, which in a roundabout way is kind of funny, actually. While this is typical of Souls to have everyone die in the end, I was a bit disappointed. I'd hoped for once that we would get some NPCs to follow us to the end. A pipe dream, I guess, but everyone dying in the end is getting a little too obvious at this point, I would think. And now we move up the staircase to what is obviously leading to the final boss fight. Of course, I wasn't ready. There's still half the map to be explored, remember? But I decided to give it a shot anyway. And it's Radahn? Okay, yes, this is really cool, but what the heck? I was really thrown for a loop here. Is this another DLC where we go back in time? Why is Miquella protected by Radahn? I thought him and Melania, who is Miquella's sister, fought in a massive war. Being someone who doesn't really watch VOD at all, and thus knows only the basics of the story, I shouldn't be surprised that I didn't know what was going on here. I thought we were just in a different realm, looking for Miquella, who ran off to this place. But no, Radahn in his younger form battles us. Again, we have rushing you as soon as you enter the fight. Grab attacks, except this time 2 grab attacks in a single battle is just insta-death, which is stupid. And man, he's aggressive. After what feels like ages, I did manage to enter the second phase. And again, bro looks sick in these cutscenes. But now it's his same moves, but with holy damage covering everything after he attacks, which again forces you to dodge in a very specific direction rather than just dodge. I gave it a good hour of tries and then decided it's not happening, dude. So I headed over to Raya Lucaria to respec into a full bleed build, stacking out Dex and Arcane to use the Rivers of Blood katana and another plain katana with a bleed Ash of War. And nothing. Another hour's worth of tries, while being much better than before, still never came to a success. He's simply too spammy and I don't understand when to dodge. Time to complete more of the map. It was about this time I went searching on YouTube for more areas of the map. I didn't really know what I needed to do to unlock those other areas. Near the Pillar Path waypoint, I found another forge area rewarding me with the Anvil Hammer for the Big Bonk fans. Continuing on down the hill, I found a shack containing Talisman of the Dread, boosting magma damage. Somehow there's just a path down here I never managed to see before. It led into the lake you see spread across the mid-section of the map. Here I found another Erdtree worm monster from the base game, although this one's more black than golden. With Bleed as my full build now, things are gonna die a bit faster. He dropped the Horned Baron item, which I couldn't find in my inventory, so not sure exactly what that does. Rivermouth Cave is hidden down here, and this location housed an interesting few encounters. At first, it starts off with you just fighting a bunch of wolves, which are pretty basic, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. Then after falling through the floor, there are these blood trolls, and a lot of them. About 18 or 20 sit in this large room all chanting. Of course, one attack aggroes all of them, which was horrifying. The bad thing about swapping builds is that now I don't have any ranged wave of elemental damage, and no healing on kills. The bleed and range of Rivers of Blood, though, does almost make up for this, but still, I eat through heals a bit faster. And these guys have to be related to Moog, as they have a mini weapon that does the bleed attack Moog's spear has. In fact, the boss here is just a larger chief version of the trolls. For some reason, they place the lock-on way higher up on this boss than they should, and the camera is terrible, but bleed cooks anything that has blood, and I could do that really fast now. I died a few times since I could definitely do this without the Mimic, and eventually got the Blood Fiend Hexer Spirit, which if this one actually builds up bleed, that could be awesome. In this new area, I managed to snag the two-headed turtle talisman for really fast stamina regeneration. A very nice one finally, and after a bit of platforming over some ledges, I reached directly underneath the first area to the DLC, I think. It's really hard to tell sometimes where you're actually at on the map, but behind here is the Cerulean Coast, a beautiful blue magic section. I did go back real quick for another Wicker Man, only to find that katanas might bleed well, but their stance damage is terrible. And these guys don't bleed, so this took a lot longer than before. He dropped the Viridian Hidden tier, which eliminates all stamina consumption. Okay, some of these are starting to look really good. This entire coast is mostly empty with some random undead and magic-based enemies scattered around. I found a few upgrade items and then reached the demi-human Queen Mariga. We fought like 4 of these in the main game, so she dies in 5 seconds. And what do you know, a new intelligence katana. That plus Moonveil are looking pretty good right about now. In the middle of this large valley is another Ghost Flame Dragon. That makes 3 now if my counting is correct, and holy cow, these guys are really hard without holy damage. They take no bleed at all, so I have the exact build you don't want it this time. I managed to take him down eventually, but I kind of missed my faith build at this moment. With a map finally in hand, I discover we can reach the entire bottom section of the DLC from here. And I also missed a section in the Dragon Peaks earlier as well. Why is the map for here covering that up? Seems goofy, but okay. At the very bottom of the map, there's a hole leading down into the earth. Clearly an homage to Nokron, as I think most players consider that a 10 out of 10 area in the base game. Here we have those same troll enemies, but they're now dealing sleep, which none ever actually got me, but that could be frustrating. There's a lot here, like giant slimes, a misty version of a creature found several times in the base game, who drops multi-layered ring of light, which hopefully is good, and a lot of jumping. This all leads to a graze site where multiple animal types lie docile behind it. Of course I left them alone, because I'm not a monster. The idea is to walk up this boat structure here and jump off. Haha, this is clearly a Madeir reference, as the arena itself looks exactly like Dark Eater Madeirs. Once you fall all the way down, an odd skeletal creature on a slime horse charges you. Another really solid boss fight, although I got rocked pretty hard for a few goes. Basically, you need to see his entire moveset before you can beat him, which is all bosses, but once I died like 3 times actually seeing everything, he felt way more manageable. I got into a bit of trouble as I haven't really used Rivers of Blood much before, and pressing the Ash of War too much locks you into attacks you can't quite get out of in time. Biggest thing to watch out for is the blue fire wave. Just jump over all the waves, but get hit once and you will likely die to frost buildup. Definitely tanked a few hits here, but again, this was a well-crafted boss fight. He isn't so spammy that you can't heal. He actually didn't do a grab attack, which is a first, and everything is more than readable after only a few tries. No clue what this creature is, but I had a good time. In the back of this arena is a weird pink flower lady that kills you when you talk to her. So after doing that a few times, I just left. Another direction you can head from this blue flower valley is alongside the beach. It leads to a truly remarkable area with fingers sticking out of the ground everywhere, clearly hinting towards the hands that attack us in the base game. For now, there's nothing we can do here, although I did find a coffin to duplicate a remembrance at. Nice to see they added more of those around. Unfortunately, one big complaint I have is, again, this is just a waste of space. It looks really awesome, but you run around it exploring to find 0 loot and no bosses. I was kind of surprised to see nothing in such an interesting landscape. With nothing to do here, I teleported back to the start of the dragon region to explore the right side that we just uncovered. This led me to an enormous dead dragon where the grand altar of dragon dragon communion resides. Here we get the priestess heart, which is supposed to turn you into a dragon form, although I can never get it to work for some reason, and the flower stone gavel. By far the strongest Ash of War I saw from the entire DLC. This thing has a ranged lightning attack that deals thousands of damage. Communing with the mist here grants me Bale's flame lightning ability from his heart. 53 arcane requirement is nuts, but okay, that's cool. On up ahead, we're in the red flower area of the map now. I take out this regular enemy Tibia Mariner for a stupid cookbook, of course, and grab the rings of spectral light from a stone bird altar here. There isn't much left here before we cross this area off our list, so let's hunt down some bosses. We've got the Deathrite Bird, a returning enemy, and likely the new hardest one in the game. This fight has several other bird enemies helping him out, and with no holy damage, these bosses are quite tanky. Luckily, I fought them time and time again at this point, and with the Mimic's help, he goes down nice and easy. Mimic tier is actually insane with Rivers of Blood. Like, he was good with other weapons as well, but this man spams that Ash of War for loads of damage. You'll love to see it. His death rewards us with a Ghost Flame Call Ash of War, which you got me on that one, it sounds awesome. Another hippo resides here. We quickly bleed to death for another fragment. Had to get grabbed because, again, how the heck do you get out of this attack, dude? I genuinely can't figure it out. And then there's another wicker basket up here, which sadly I couldn't defeat. This one has metal guards on his legs, which I guess makes them take no damage. And back to the good old YouTube, since I have no clue what else to do again. After some brief research, it turns out there's a secret exit you can leave from inside Shadow Keep. At the main entrance, you're going to take a right outside the shortcut you would have opened upon your first arrival here. Up the ramp on the right near some boats is a ladder. Grab a painting you'll never find the location for, and ta-da, a hidden door that you can break through. Enter the coffin. As all souls enjoyers should know by now, you get in the coffin. We end up in a cavern where tons of these wicker giants lie dead. Grabbing their crafting materials I will never use, a live one spawns in to be taken out. He drops the oil-soaked tear, which coats nearby enemies with oil. Sounds useless. Or maybe it makes fire deal more damage? That could be kinda neat. For the life of me, I cannot find a way into this small building here, so I left to scale a cliff. Which, good thing I came here because there's 2 hippos who drop fragments. Maybe I will actually beat Radon after all. Hey, this one didn't grab me finally. Oh, come on, the other one did. Seriously? Scaling down the cliff even more, we enter the Dark Light Catacombs. The gimmick of this dungeon being all the lights are turned off. Pulling levers around the dungeon turns them back on, and there's even a giant golem shooting explosive rocks. Apparently there's a spirit summon behind him too, but sadly I missed that and it's way too deep in that dungeon for me to go back, so bummer on that one. At the bottom is a unique arena for sure, with Jory the Elder Inquisitor. And hey, another good boss fight. Use the environment to block his magic and dodge everything else. Or simply eat it. I guess technically that's a strategy too there, bud. Funnily enough, there's a fight almost identical to this in Lords of the Fallen, if you guys played that. Both enemies actually share a design as well, at least in my head. Well, by this point, I give it up on pulling punches and just beat this guy down with bleed. If you can't beat him, join him. Because all you non-bleed users out there know deep down, you want to be as cool as us. Don't lie. And he dropped the barbed staff spear, which shoots out holy waves or something. I don't know, bleed builds can't use anything but bleed. And then we reach the Abyssal Woods, which has some good and some bad, so let's talk about it. First off, your horse is terrified of this area, so you can't use him here. But the size of this place is way too big. I must have walked around for forever. You fight against a Madness Invader at the start, who is certainly a threat. His defeat grants you the Maddening Hand, so you can punch with madness. No thanks. And there are some messages here warning you of something you can't kill. If it sees you, death is imminent. Okay, scary, but I couldn't really find anything like that. If you take the wrong path, which I did, you walk aimlessly around an empty forest with nothing to loot, which definitely sucks since you're on foot this whole time. Take the correct path, however, and you find what is obviously another Bloodborne-esque enemy, the Frenzy Heads. Hide in the grass to stealth past them. Get caught, and they instantly kill you. I thought maybe you could take them from behind, but no, they're just death machines. And yeah, it's a small section of stealth in Elden Ring. I've seen some people trashing this, which is kind of fair. It's not really good stealth or anything, but it's a very brief section that did stand out, and I think it's what they were kind of going for. I died to one of these monsters again in the fog since I couldn't see him, and after that found a structure hidden in the very back of these woods. I do think this region is, again, far too big. Would have been way better to have a linear section with the stealth, especially since there really isn't anything interesting anywhere in the woods. But the feeling of being lost in a deep, dark, woodsy area did spice things up a bit, I have to admit. This building was another fun castle section, but there really isn't anything important here until the boss. Behind this giant painting here, you walk up to another gray site, and here comes the single best boss fight in Elden Ring's DLC. No, Elden Ring in general. It's a tiny man. Yeah, you just kill this tiny dude, and voila! The glorious Frenzy Lord is born. This cutscene's freaking awesome! He looks ridiculously cool. So you know I'm doing this with no summons, of course. I almost have to. Obviously the guy's tough, it's a DLC boss, but once again we have attacks that are well telegraphed. You've got several openings when he isn't attacking at all, and I did a lot of damage every single attempt. Of course, madness everywhere is challenging since that builds up to destroy your health bar, and this one laser frenzy attack always seemed to just blast out of nowhere. The music does not deserve to be as good as it is here for this battle, and it's probably the only boss fight where I could take heals without him instantly attacking to catch me during the heal. Staying close makes the fight 10 times easier, which is honestly a trope a lot of these bosses just come with now, as staying far away baits out boss moves that are way harder to dodge. I never did fully master his moveset, and it took all but one healing flask. Still, the Frenzy Lord succumbs to rivers of blood, and man, that was awesome. This DLC is worth it just for this Frenzy boss alone. Sadly, FromSoft just doesn't do story like at all, which is definitely a shame. Learning about who the heck this guy is and why he's in the back of some haunted woods would have been awesome. Lore's fun, I know, but it's not the same as story. I think a little more story to go along with the lore in these games would go a long way, but hey, that's just one guy's opinion. Now again, I have nowhere to go. The woods area here doesn't really lead to anything else, so for the third time, it's back to the internet to figure this out. I also found a very short video explaining how to get down the hole I died repeatedly at early on. Basically, you need to be on torrent and jump onto the wall, then fall down. This is the same exact fall distance, if not further, but for some reason, you don't die this way. I don't know, it's very finicky as it still took me a few tries and is definitely a flaw I hope they fix, but finally we drop down to have access to the rest of the DLC. Behind Morth Ruins is Bonnie Village, which is an extremely important location, so don't forget about it. Before I explain that though, I decided to head across this bridge and enter the Bonnie Jail, a largely uneventful dungeon with pot enemies I do enjoy fighting. The boss turns out to be one of those dual-bladed crazy things, the enemy I died to upon starting the DLC. Now it's a boss, and I think I finally am well above the level of upgrades I need, because he's literally nothing. No summons, he died in 10 seconds. I'll take it. Bonnie Village has a revered spirit ash and more importantly, an emote. In the very back near this dead tree is the Oh Mother emote. This is required to unlock a large portion of land coming up, so I equip it immediately to not forget. Passing bridges is a tooth whip which builds up poison. Sadly, I think the whips in Elden Ring are not my style and poison's complete crap from my experience, but there aren't very many whips in the game, so good to expand upon them. Up ahead is a wicker giant who has iron legs and is immune, so running past him I find a church tower where sadly I could not find the entrance. You need to jump up a wind column, but the rocks block it, and after searching everything here I could not find anything at all. Moving along the path, we get to the large blue building seen on the right section of the map. Here I meet a Black Knight NPC and a magic leader of some kind. Speaking to him grants me a hole-laden necklace and a ruins map. This quest is what the large finger land was made for. Teleporting back there, we blow into this large finger stone and are granted the Crimson Seed Talisman +1. Another useless talisman as it just increases how much your flask heals you. Or so I thought. Turns out this is actually really strong as it's what allowed me to beat the final boss. Crazy, I know. Heading back to the NPC gives me another map which leads to the other large finger area we can clearly see on the map. However, this section hasn't been opened up yet, so let's move on. This path leads back to the underside of Shadowkeep Castle. We're now in the church district, although everything is covered in water. My one complaint here is you need to make this jump that's very clearly just a tad too far away. I died here and had to walk all the way back just to barely make it again. Inside the church, we use the Iris of Grace, which when the heck I got that, who knows, and it turns this random dude into a Fire Knight summons. Those guys are tough, so that could be pretty neat to try out. Then pushing this large lever, we empty the castle of all its water and say, hey, they did that Dark Souls 1 thing. Now with the water gone, we grab another summons upgrade, defeat the Erdtree worm for the Iris of Oculation, which you can give to the Black Knight in the church to save her as a summons, that I sadly missed. Then another worm for the Mantle of Thorns, which sounds kind of interesting. I'd like to see someone mess with that in the future. The Fire Knight seal, boosting those new fire incantations, hides back behind a statue here, and in the very back of this church, in a small room, you go down a secret elevator, taking you to an Iris of Grace. I never figured out what did. and leading to one massive decaying area. The very base of the tree here, we now come upon the third best DLC boss, that being the Tree Avatar. He's a large decaying flower with thorny branches entangling everything. I once again did not use the summons as it's a very well made boss design. It took some time to figure things out, but here's the idea. The boss has 3 phases. Yep, we have another Sister Freed situation from Dark Souls 3. But this time, the fight isn't nearly as insane as that, and it's just a single boss instead of 2. I'm the type of person that really hates multi-phase bosses. If the boss transitions, it should be in 1 health bar, not making me beat the guy just for another new form to show up. It was my biggest complaint with a few bosses and the Lies of P, as it just turns fights into a slog. However, this is one of the very few times in games that this was handled exactly as it should have been. First off, the boss takes way more damage in the flower head part of his body. The blood slash from Rivers was hitting that and deleting him. Second, he doesn't have that much health to begin with, so you can quickly get through his phases in an appropriate amount of time. I also found the attacks here to be nice and readable once again. I don't remember a grab attack being there, and he feels very similar to the Erdtree avatars from the base game, which is supposed to be the point. I can actually see what is happening in the battle. The attacks make sense, and I might mess up, but with precise reactions, there's no spammy nonsense. One major issue though is the ranged attack. These light projectiles track you, and even when you dodge them, you get hit. I tried many times, and no matter what I did, they just hit me. I found that using the arena to block them was the only good strategy, but eventually the boss breaks all of this away, and so you're forced to just eat the explosion. As you get into his third phase, the boss actually begins to slow down and attack less, giving you more chances to deal damage. I just want to point out all the boss fights I loved in this DLC weren't spammy and filled with cluttering animations. Because just dodging something when you see it coming is satisfying enough for a boss fight. I think this one only took me about 5 tries. Although not sure how I survived the AoE before this, but hey, I don't complain when things work out, okay? The Water District also has an elevator that leads back up into the castle. Here I find the Carrion Thrusting Shield, which there are 2 thrusting shields in the DLC, and oddly this was the weapon type I was excited for. But after using them, they just feel like regular shields with minor changes, so I immediately lost interest. After some adventuring through rafters and outside walkways, we go down an elevator and reach 2 dissecting paths. Inside this room here was a message, which I always play offline, so messages actually mean something, and I had to assume this is where I should use the Oh Mother emote, considering there's a statue here I remembered hearing about. And once used, the statue moves to open into probably the most beautiful area in the game. Wow, this is actually kind of pretty. With the grace unlocked, I headed back to see what was the other direction. And look at that, it's a boss fight. Now, I didn't really give this one a chance, as I died once and then just pulled the mimic out because the commander seemed like he would be kind of annoying, and I was a bit right. I don't really think he's that hard once you get used to the battle, but like the hippos, he once again has a charge attack that no matter how I dodged, it just hit me. Like, how am I supposed to learn the fight if it just has a massive hitbox? I'm sure there's a way, but for the 5 or 6 dodges I did, I always get hit. The commander uses a gravity lance while the boar hits with ground slams. It's not all that different from the tree sentinel bosses, at least in principle. However, at this point, I was kind of ready to move on, and the cool factor here was lost on me as I was being a bit lazy, just spamming mimic and blade to get it done. Hey, I dodged a few attacks for some cool moments. Give me that at least. In the end, another solid boss fight if you give it the chance. And what do you know? The only thing behind this guy is the Sharp Shot Talisman for improved aim shots. I think bows needed. And not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 fragments to increase my power with. Yeah, man, that's what I need. Well, with only the grassy area left, I went back to find some tree sentinels walking around. What the heck, I was just talking about you guys. There was a summon sign for the Black Knight, which I wanted to see what she did, of course, and she's okay, I guess. Again, tree sentinels aren't super hard, since we've battled them time and time again in the base game, so they sort of fall over, granting nothing important either. Atop this hill is a tiny forgotten village with 2 items. Minor Erdtree incantation, which I don't have a clue what that does, and the ever so important golden braid talisman hidden inside a tree here. The talisman grants a massive boost in defense to, you guessed it, holy damage. And guess which boss has a stupid amount of holy damage in his second phase? The only one left. Or so I thought, as the game kind of surprised me once again, but yeah, very important for Radahn when we get back to him. In a small crater here, we fight a falling star beast. There are like 3 or 4 of these in the base game, so without any crazy trouble, I first try him solo, and earn Gravitational Missile. Then running down this area all the way through to another finger for me to blow, I earn the Cerulean Seed Talisman +1, which progresses the quest, but come on, this is the reward? That's hot garbage, dude. When have you ever needed more FP from your flasks? Not even max sorcerers need that. For something a bit funny, back in the Mage NPC, he gives me yet another map. And I could have sworn that the building on the map was this building here where the NPC is. But there's just no fingers here. So after a quick check on the wiki, I had to exhaust his dialogue and then he would disappear. Interacting with this chair sends me down where the other finger is. They went all out on these fingers, man. They look crazy. Down below is the Black Knight Invader, but now she has claws. Obviously the fight was nothing since Rivers trashes in, well, not PvP fights, but PvE PvP fights, if that makes any sense. But I did get the claws she uses. The claws are incredible. I messed with them and they have a ranged bleed attack which just destroys. I freaking love these things. Blowing on the finger here grants me no reward this time, but a boss fight instead. The Mother of Fingers stands before me. Or sits. I don't really know what fingers do when they're just there, but whatever, the finger mommy looms above us. And again, I think first trying new bosses is impossible at this point, so no hope for that. But another really solid boss fight. Reminds me of the Rom boss fight from Bloodborne, actually. Main thing to take away here is the boss attacks multiple times in a row. She makes it look like you have an opening, but with just a tad more patience, you can then avoid another 2 head slams. Staying in close avoids the lasers, and somehow I always seem to get hit by AoEs no matter what I do. But with enough heals, I can beat her down with no summons again. Actually nice to see I didn't need the spirits from multiple bosses, even on my first run. Near the end, I got super lucky as she lasered while I was in close, giving me a massive window for damage. And her mistake is my fortune, as I took her down just before another AoE went off. Of course, the only thing left in this DLC that I know is available is the final fight against Radahn, and boy, I'm not looking forward to that. This was an hour and a half I cannot get back. At this point, I think we've got about 5 or 6 S-tier boss fights in this DLC, counting only Remembrance ones. Then there's the Fire boss, which I hate more than anything, and Radahn, which is also terrible. Now, I've watched someone literally just parry this guy to death, which is kind of stupid, you could do something like that. But if you're actually fighting his regular moveset, it's complete nonsense. First phase sucks for a long time, but eventually you start to see at least how you should be dodging, because the keys really just dodge into him. That's mainly it. However, his second phase is the second worst boss design I think I've ever seen. Holy light flashes so much around this arena, I almost went blind, and you can't ever see the attacks you need to dodge as so much is in the way. Not to mention, you're forced to roll directly into the large boss to avoid the first attack and the follow-up holy damage, which means you're literally staring at Radahn's cape for the entire fight. It's just plain awful, man. They amped him up way too much and in not a good way. Not to mention, it was here I found out that if you get grabbed twice in one fight, Miquella just forces you to bow to her and you instantly die. Taking the control from the player's hands is never a good mechanic, and it's really cheap. For the final boss of Elden Ring's DLC, yeah, this is as hard as it gets. But hard bosses don't mean good ones. I think my overview here was pretty clearly laid out. When I can't heal because the boss begins his next combo just after I take damage, that's terrible. When I get rushed as soon as the fight starts, that's awful. And when I finally learn all the moves for the fight just for more AoE nonsense to be added in the second phase, that's just not going to cut it for me. So for my actual build here, I did have to rely on a lot of holy negation items for general defense, and the Cerulean Talisman to heal way more from a single flask. This let me have almost double the heals for my health bar, and eventually I won with 0 heals and no HP. I will be very happy to never fight this guy again, I know that much. But with the final fight, I have officially beaten Elden Ring's DLC for the first time. And there you have all of my thoughts on the entirety of this DLC. I wanted to better explain myself in parts and show you why certain bosses were harder than they really needed to be. For example, both the dragon boss and the first night boss, I could have had double the upgrade fragments for. But overall, I did have a lot of fun. Almost all the bosses are some of the coolest and well designed in the game. I think they just went a bit overboard with spamming magic for those 2 I mentioned, but other than that, all the others were really fun to take on. As for equipment, I don't know, there really wasn't as much OP stuff as the YouTubers made it seem like. There were a couple weapons that are insane, mainly for their Ash of War, about 6 or 7 talismans that are really good, with the rest being situational or pointless, and armor, actually there were some really cool armor sets. If I had to tell you my single favorite part of this DLC, it has to be the Frenzy boss, because it was just awesome. And if I had to give you my biggest flaw, I would say this DLC is just way too big. The places look really cool, but as most open worlds go, they overdid it. You just end up running through empty spaces a lot. Limgrave is still the most well-made area in Elden Ring, packed full of content. I don't think there's a fix for this because, again, they made it to have this massive open atmosphere with awe and amazement. You're going to lose some of that cutting it down, but gameplay-wise, it would be an improvement to cut the world like almost in half. Is it worth your time? Yes, definitely yes. At least one really big playthrough is going to be tons of fun for you, and if you explore more, some of the harder bosses can be beaten using just brute force. The one thing keeping you from playing it is a lot of enemies have super spammy moves. Honestly, moving the game more towards Sekiro than the Souls series, which makes a lot of these elites not fun to fight, but usually you can avoid them or find some range attack to cheese them with. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I know it was a bit of a long one, but it's very unlikely I'm ever going to play this again because Elden Ring really is, at this point, just a massive game. With this much added content, it makes it really hard to finish a single character before moving on to a different game. But I did want to get all my thoughts out there, and I know I missed some stuff as there were a few locations of the map I just couldn't get to. And until the wiki's updated further, I have to say that's out of my reach. But anyway, thanks for watching. A like down below would mean a ton, and I'll catch you next time.